Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you so much to the organizers. Absolutely a pleasure to be here, to be able to join virtually. To start with, I would say that the African continent has made quite a bit of strides in advancing policy action, or say policy framework, in addressing the issue of climate mobility. And one of the most accepted framework that we currently have is the Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change, which is known as the KDMECC. This specific framework was actually from the ministers from the Eastern Africa and IGAD region. However, it has now become it has now become a regional, I mean the entire a continental framework. As at as at last year, we have 48 countries that have already signed to this specific framework. And now the African Union is also trying to integrate this specific framework into what will now be a continental framework, so to speak. So this is a huge one, and the major potential is because this specific framework include young people, it include women, it include a lot of stakeholders in developing this specific framework, and it has also gained a lot of attention from the international community, like the IOM and a couple of UN organizations, and they are embracing this specific framework. So it is one of the major frameworks that we have on climate mobility at the moment in Africa. However, we also have some regional frameworks, not specifically on climate mobility, however, but some of them are actually around climate change. For instance, the ECOWAS region, I mean, the West African region, we have the climate change strategy, the ECOWAS climate change strategy, and there is also the free movement protocol, which is around free movement within the sub-region. And also the IGAD region, and the IGAD region also have the free movement protocol. There's the climate change strategy, and there's the climate change framework, and there is also the disaster risk reduction framework. So there are a wide range of existing framework that one way or the other key into the climate mobility discourse. But the question would be how how can we say that this framework can advance meaningful action, especially for the people on the ground? And a major challenge that some of us that work in the space have seen is it is difficult to implement some of these things, or we are yet to see meaningful implementation because number one, we see that there is little literacy around climate change on the continent. Specifically at the moment, recent research shows that there is only 37% national average of climate change, climate literacy on the continent. One of the countries that have the highest is Uganda, is 62%, Mauritius has 66%. But other countries, even Nigeria, has very low climate literacy. So without climate literacy, not just for experts or stakeholders that work in the space, but people on the ground that actually on day-to-day basis, at the moment it is raining season in the continent in West Africa. A lot of flooding events are being recorded as we speak. Last year, the recent report from IDMC, the Displacement Monitoring Center, shows that the continent saw 6 million displacements in 2023. So it is to tell you that it is a growing crisis, and it is not just about displacement alone. We are also seeing people moving because of slow onset climate like drought and a few others. So it is a growing crisis, and if people are not aware in terms of literacy, it's difficult. But this literacy is not just about the people. We have also seen that our policymakers have little knowledge about climate literacy, especially on climate mobility. What we have seen is that they don't see it as a problem, and when we don't see it as a problem, it becomes very difficult. So there is a very low literacy level from the people on the ground, and also at the policy level, and also access to quality information. For instance, at the moment on the continent, there are some context, majority of materials that we have that are climate literacy are still yet to unravel the context level I mean, the reality on the ground. Of course, we have seen a lot of informative material, and that is what we are trying to do also at the ACMI to ensure that we have context-based information that reflect the reality on the ground. So these are some of the things, but the challenges at the moment of access to information, climate literacy makes it very difficult for meaningful implementation of some of these existing frameworks. Another thing we have also seen as a major challenge is the interaction of climate change or climate mobility when it comes to other developmental challenges. Developmental challenges in the sense of economic downturn, in terms of food security, but also in some areas where there are violent conflict. For instance, in the West African region, especially in, say, the Lake Chad Basin, where there is a lot of drying of the Lake Chad Basin, which at the moment has dried about 90% of the water has now dried up due to intense droughts. So because of this, we are seeing a couple of humanitarian issues in terms of food security, lack of water, but also we are seeing violent conflict from this. And this is now interacting with a whole lot of reality on the ground. So this makes it very difficult. This makes it very difficult for policymakers to say, are we addressing climate change? Are we addressing human mobility? Are we addressing food security? So a whole gamut of issues coming together makes it very difficult for policymakers to address some of these issues head on. And because climate mobility or climate change itself is not something that some of these policymakers, because they see it as, well, it's not something that we are seeing facially, but then you are seeing the impact. So there is a host, and that also goes back to what we said about climate literacy. Literacy level among the political class is extremely low, and this is what we are trying to drive to ensure that if you understand it, either through knowledge exchange, you can definitely be able to help the people on the ground. But this also do not take some of the existing local knowledge or local adaptive action that are already on ground before now. But some of them do not even know that they are trying to adapt to climate change. They all just think it's some traditional ways of life. So what we are saying is it is a major challenge at the moment, and some of these interaction in terms of literacy, economic downturn, food insecurity, violent conflict makes it very difficult for policymakers to address some of these issues. Another thing we have also seen is the lack of political will. So what we have seen is that, and also as an African myself, we have seen that majority of African leaders, or let's say majority of some of our policymakers, just sign up to a couple of regional or even global frameworks. For instance, they are part of the Paris Agreement. Majority are part of the GCM, which is the Global Compact on Migration. They are part of a lot of global framework that address climate change and human mobility, and even the human right aspect of it. But what we have seen is a very low localization of some of these efforts on the ground. If you are yet, they are yet to integrate some of these efforts or some of this regional framework. We have talked about the Kampala Ministerial Declaration now. We are yet to start seeing it on the ground at the national policy level. And a major way to see if a government is serious about addressing an issue is when you put your budget into it. But at the moment, we are not seeing any budgetary allocation. We are not seeing that. So it becomes extremely difficult to talk about the government's commitment. And this definitely affects the agency of the people on the ground. And that is the last point I'm going to make before I drop the mic. Another problem that we see that is making it difficult is the people are not meaningfully integrated into this formulation, and especially people on the ground. And so, as we always call them, most of these people on the ground, either it is religious leaders, either it is local authorities, or either it is people themselves. I mean, people on the frontline communities. We call them de facto response team usually, but because they are not usually part of decision-making processes. They are not either part of the regional or even national policy making, or even in the implementation part of it. So if they are not part of the process, it makes it difficult to address their concerns. Either we are talking about loss and damage, either we are talking about adaptive action, or either we are talking about their voices on their experiences, it becomes extremely difficult to integrate them. So what I'm saying is it's important for inclusion, and this is some of the challenges we are facing, and we hope that this can actually help address their issues. Thank you, and over.